we ever gonna get some of the decorations up? I had those shrunken heads imported all the way from whatever. All right, 2, 3, 4. Ba da ba 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 da da. Do 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 boop. Oh no. Do, do. It's Wednesday. I've lost the card already. Oh God. Pause it for a second. Will you? Pics of week. Hi everybody. My name is Jimmy, and I hauled a full backpack home from the comic book store today. Felt like I was at Comic-Con. You may or may not recall. Why would you? I've only been kind of picking and choosing stuff over the last 6 weeks, I guess, because I've been pretty broke. I'm a really bad loan shark, and so I'm owed a lot of money, and I have not broken hardly any kneecaps for it. But a piece of that money finally came in this week. I had to wait an extra day. I couldn't go to the shop yesterday, but finally today I got some of that money, so I went up there and I bought all kinds of crap. And boy, did it really set my mood right. I've been looking to punch somebody right through the head for the last 2 weeks, and now I'm totally fine with just breaking someone's nose. So first up for this week, I got Savage Hearts #1. Oh, there's a lot of glare in here. Excuse me. Close the studio door. That didn't really help, did it? This is from Dark Horse Comics. It's written by Aubrey Sitterson, who I've read before, but now I can't remember what. I want to say, all right, I have the computer right in front of me now. If it's what I'm thinking, then it's... Oh, hold on. How have you been? Go ahead and talk amongst yourselves if you prefer. Right. Ba ba ba. Do do do. He wrote No One Left to Fight, which I remember wanting to read, but didn't. Man, did he not write Shirtless Bear Fighter? That's what I would have swore. He's big into wrestling and stuff, so that kind of, even though I haven't followed wrestling in a very long time, I still admire it. Regardless, this book looks like I had to flip through it in the shop, and it's like a jungle adventure type comic, which is jungle adventure is a subgenre that I've always liked, but I've never been. I don't have a ton of it. I own on my Kindle, like a long time ago, I bought all the Tarzan novels, and I've read the first one. It was a Kindle pack, it was like $1 for every single Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan book, and so stuff like that I like, and like I'm actually looking forward to that Jungle Cruise movie, even though it looks dumb. It is one of my favorite rides at Disneyland, so that should be fun. I'll probably have a ton more of other stuff because I bought 6 weeks worth of comics basically, so I'll probably talk about other stuff too. But I'm trying to keep this at 10% of the episode I did last week. Also, this week is Aliens Aftermath #1 from Marvel. Now that Marvel has the 20th Century Fox licenses, since they own 20th Century Fox, they have a regular monthly Aliens book, which I'm a fan of. And as I'm sure I've mentioned before, I actually prefer the comics over the movies. The movies are great, the first two anyway. The third one didn't. I loved the third one when it came out, but it did not hold up on rewatch, and Resurrection was a piece of poop. And then beyond that, I only have seen them sporadically, but the comics are always super fun. And this takes place directly after the 1986 film Aliens, which I might want to rewatch anyway, just because it's been a while. It's often everyone's favorite, if not the first one. It's a very different film from the first one, so I kind of get it. But so I'm sure it's maybe Bill Paxton, or is it Paxton? Yeah, Bill Paxton will be in it in honorarium. I also bought a couple trades this week, although I probably won't read these. Who knows when? But first up is Scales and Scoundrels Book 1. This is from TKO. I have a standing order at the shop to anything TKO. So there's this one, and then there's this one also from TKO, pronounced Jelia. I'm not sure. It's credited as a West African fantasy epic, which you don't see a lot of those. This looks like pretty standard sword and sorcery. If it has an ampersand in the middle, Dungeons and Dragons or whatever the hell else. But TKO Press, which I discovered last year during the quarantine, has been really good stuff. And just glancing at this one, it looks like fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons type fantasy, but much little cartoonier art, which I'm into. Kind of like in the vein of Headlopper from Image Comics, which I also recommend. And then this here looks similar, but obviously it's West African. And yeah, I wish there were. I honestly do wish there were more. Every time I read a comic that takes place in Africa that's not Black Panther, I'm always like, why isn't there more of this? African mythology, but with a broad brush, fascinating stuff. Um, yeah, I wish there was more of it. Frankly, when I was a kid, like a freshman in high school, there was a publisher I want to say called DMZ, but that might not be right. But they had a book called Motorbike Puppies that I really liked. That might have been more African American, but with it had like a kind of African nationalist bent to it, which in eighth and ninth grade was very much my thing. I should look into those. There was also a comic back then called Brother Man, but that was definitely African American and not African. But I mean, often there's a connection. There was a really really good Marvel comic called Truth, subtitled Red, White, and Black, that was about the original Super Soldier program, which, not unlike Tuskegee, was was tried out on black soldiers in World War II, and that was also really good. And there were connections, like, and it was by Kyle Baker, and he drew a lot of connections back to, like, because I feel like, again, with like jungle adventure and stuff, like Zulu warriors and African warriors, that stuff is badass. I wish there was more of it. More Shaft in Africa is what I'm asking for. That's the sort of blend I totally am into. And then, of course, oh, this has been sitting in my book and in my bag for months now. This is volume 3 of Steve Gerber's Man Thing. I don't know if this is the last one. I don't know how much more Man Thing Gerber wrote. And this looks like it goes up. Oh, yeah. No, this might be the last one. There was one of the last things Gerber did before he died was Infernal Man Thing, yeah, which is in here. Okay, cool. This might, in fact, Infernal Man Thing might have come out after he died, but it's drawn by Kevin Nolan, and I own that series, so I feel like even if there's more Gerber Man Thing out there, I probably already have it. So if they put out another volume, I'm not going to need it, but I might. I mean, hell, I'm just in a spendy mood because I have a little bit of money. Not enough to buy a car, but to buy some comics. So anyway, that's Pixel. Did it, da. And then so I got all caught up on my, which wasn't that difficult, but I got so many comics now, and I still don't have a car, so I'm probably just gonna stay in all weekend. I haven't seen Black Widow yet, so I should probably do that. But in the meantime, okay. So last week I read Usagi Yojimbo number 20. Yeah, and this is a two-part story called Yukichi, and this is Yukichi, the character, and I misgendered this character. This is a young fellow. Tell me that's not a very feminine rabbit face, though. But yeah, good stuff as always. I mean, honestly, like I think I said last week, I just wanted to put it on top of the pile because I hadn't read any Usagi Yojimbo in a while. And write that rhyme down. And yeah, great stuff. It's the same sort of deal. Same sort of deal. It's a pretty standard story where Usagi meets this young fellow Yukichi who was once upon a time the apprentice to a great swordsmaster, and he meets Usagi on the road, and he's like, "Oh, we've met before," and they flash back to that, and back to the present where this young man is now, this young bunny is now being threatened by local toughs, and so Usagi has to step in and save the day, as always. So can't go wrong with that. Oh man, Shang Chi #2. Shang Chi versus Captain. I couldn't remember for a second, but then I did. So each one I'm starting to pick up on it. Each one of the subtitle of this is Shang Chi versus the Marvel Universe. And so the previous issue was Shang Chi versus Spider Man. This one's Captain America. I think next week, next month, next issue will be Iron Man. And it all has to. So did I mention this? I think I must have. I finally saw the Shang Chi trailer. I finally saw the Shang Chi trailer, and as I suspected, they have written out Fu Manchu out of the canon, which is whatever. And now Shang Chi is the son of a sort of more generic triad, Chinese gangster. And the name of their organization is the Five Deadly Weapons, or the Five Deadly Blades. Now I do have to recheck it. The Five Weapons Society. It's very. And so now that Shang-Chi is head of the Five Weapons Society, he is determined to make it a force for good. And as I mentioned, sort of how Sunspot tried to do with AIM a few years ago. But in order to do that, he still has to kind of play along. This is also similar to the TKO book from last year called The Notorious Dr. Fang. I think that was what it was called. Where it's this big, scary yellow peril type villain, but he's really just trying to use that to affect change for good. And so Shang-Chi infiltrates sort of supervillain party or a villainous organization auction. That's what it was, because they were auctioning off the Cosmic Cube. And so ostensibly he was there as a leader of the Five Weapons Society to outbid against the Serpent Society and AIM and Hydra and all them. And then Captain America shows up, and then it's they're on a collision course with wackiness. But that's a I will, now that I'm saying it out loud, that is a thing that has been used in superhero comics, especially Marvel, a lot lately, where there's constantly going on auctions and stuff like that. These black market. Nobody uses the internet. That seems if you want to go into the dark web, you want to buy a Cosmic Cube. I guess there's the hands-on touch. Well, it's in the Marvel 616. Earth 616. It's a much different Earth. And also, I read the new issue of Bad Texas Blood #7. This is the first issue of the next arc. And it is also really good. And this one, so the last arc was about a guy who had left this small town in Texas because he didn't want to, he didn't want to be a burnout and just, but his father and brother, I believe, stayed back, and then a murder takes place. So he comes back to try to solve it. And meanwhile, the sheriff is trying to, and again, the sheriff here is the main character. Now, in this one, there's been yet another disturbing crime, and it harkens him back to, or no, I think it's actually the arc previous has kind of set him on this thing where he's remembering this satanic cult that had been in town in the early 80s. And so we're going to flash back to that and see what that story was. And I'm a big fan of Satanic Panic type stuff from the 80s. There's also a character introduced that's kind of Kolchak the Night Stalker, like this paranormal investigator. He's a private eye, but he's specializes in the weird. And so that problem, I never watched Kolchak, oddly enough, but who doesn't love Darren McGavin? And I didn't watch the whole series, but I like the X-Files a lot, and so stuff like that's always fun. And so that'll be great. This is not something I bought last week, but this was something I showed you last year that I put in the Therese stack, and then I just finally finished it a year later. This is Kirby, King of Comics by Mark Evanier. This is a biography of Jack Kirby. This is like the second one of these I've read in the last couple of years because I can't get enough. And unsurprisingly, since Mark Evanier was Jack Kirby's assistant when Mark was in high school, it's a very pro Kirby. You know, it really does paint Stan and everybody else as kind of the villains, and not unfairly. I don't think there was a great. I think I might have mentioned this because my friend Frank made a point to mention this too. There's a great point that Mark Evanier makes about the relationship between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which was obviously pretty complicated, although it needn't have been, which is the thing. So, if you're on thumbnail version, is uh, Kirby and Lee created the Fantastic Four together, and then Stan Lee got rich and famous off of it, and Jack Kirby got bupkis off of it. Um, Despite the fact that he did the lion's share of the creative work, I'm willing to believe that they created it together, but at a certain point, Kirby clearly just takes the reins and goes, and then Stan was too busy trying to book college lectures to even really write the book anymore. Even though they're credited as having done, so, written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby for years. Finally, that was changed to just by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, which still should be Kirby and Lee, but I digress. And then, so this was a sticking point between the two of them, and then it was, it's a thing in fandom. For years, guys like me have argued the merits, and I don't, honestly, I've never met somebody who was like, Kirby's nuts, it's all Lee. But that's kind of the tragedy of it is that enthusiasts such as myself who have read up on this, it's really difficult to walk away with any other opinion than Jack got screwed. The opposite camp is not, no, Stan Lee is the creator. The opposite camp is who the hell are you even talking about? People know who Stan Lee though is because at a certain point in the 70s, Stan Lee's job became being Stan Lee. Like he was a brand before that was even a thing people talked about. So it was a sticking point between the two of them for years, and it was something that, like, as a fan of Stan Lee myself, that I had to like kind of go like, I have to kind of ignore the fact that Stan Lee is kind of a hack and hack in the fact that he hacked a lot of Kirby's shit. And but Stan always denied it, or at the very least, he never. I don't know if you could say he denied it, but he never owned up to it. I think that's fair to say. And he would always blame Marvel. He would blame the suits upstairs. I'm not in charge. And Mark Evanier said he was talking to Stan once. I think this was in the 80s, maybe in the 90s. And Stan was giving him that song and dance. Oh, Mark, it's not me. I had nothing against. I love Jack, and I want to work with him again, and all this stuff. And Mark says to him, "You know what, Stan? In every single Martin and Lewis movie, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis movie, there comes a point where Dean Martin goes, 'Hey, nobody says that about my pal,' and fights a guy. He's like, 'You never did that. You you just let people believe that you created the Fantastic Four, and then you made all this money off of it because Stan would insert himself as executive producer in the cartoons and in the terrible movies, and never broke Jack off a piece as would have been the right thing to do. And so yeah, I've always liked that. That's I always I read that earlier this year, but that's a really good. Nobody says that about my pal. Is how I feel about Jack Kirby for sure, and I think most Kirby fans. I think the other great thing, and Mark Evanier, I just read the goddamn book. It's just so good looking. There's so many. I love the size of this thing, and there's so many like these sorts of posters and stuff that Jack did, and original mock-ups of the like this Fantastic Four cover and stuff like that. And a lot of the stuff in black and white looks even better because Kirby was a very bold. He drew almost like with a marker sometimes. I think the other best thing about that Mark Evanier said about Jack Kirby is that Jack Kirby was a genius at creating comics, and he was terrible at getting paid for them. But undisputed king of comics. I don't care what anybody says. And if you want to keep it to just superhero comics, you want to say Jack Kirby's the best superhero comics creator. I think he's one of the best comic book creators, period. But, what do you expect? All right, that's half the time. And I'm going to go read a whole lot of comics